We're back, we're live, we're here on a given Monday in West of Asia, part of the Think Tech series with Rafi Boritzer, one of our favorite guests. He's a lecturer in public administration in West Oahu campus, and he's the president of
Maritime
Protection.
Protector.
Protector is a company here
Yes.
in Hawaii. Okay, and we want to talk to him today about Israeli politics, because way back in the past, Rafi was an Israeli, is an Israeli today.
I'm still an Israeli.
Still
yes.
an Israeli today.
Still a veteran of the Israel Defense Forces, still a veteran of the Israeli police and a few other agencies.
Okay, wonderful. So we talked today about Israeli politics in 2014, which is really Israeli politics going forward. That's what it is. And we want to get a handle on how that interacts with the Iran agreement, how it interacts with all the players in the region. So who are the players in the region that we need to consider?
Well, I think number one, of course, being totally egotistical, we have to think about the United States. That's where this is the solar system. Everything revolves, or we'd like to believe that everything revolves around the United States. And consequently, the United States is always looked upon to set a policy about any events, and other people can react to it. But the United States doesn't like it when other people set their own policies, because then it has to react to them, and that's always a secondary position. You never want to be the leader or reactive. And so the whole Iranian situation is exactly an example of that. But it almost was a standoff, and what we see now, the negotiation process and so on, is as a result of being almost at a deadlock between the United States and Iran. It only took since 1979 to develop this deadlock, only a mere 30 years, 34 years.
What do you mean by deadlock?
Well, deadlock where you demonize the other side, where you ascribe all kinds of things, where you don't really have first-hand contacts, so you rely upon secondary contacts, intelligence, newspaper, television, public statements. And I think we mentioned the last time that I was on the show, you asked me about Ahmadinejad, the president, and Ahmadinejad played the role of the clown, the court jester, but kind of to annoy the audience, you know, to kind of give it to them, say outrageous things, and then the United States and other countries of the world, perhaps I would use the word normal, though I hate to use the word normal because I don't think anybody is normal. But so we would kind of jump every time he said the word Holocaust, and that was, of course, designed to get the American Jews all excited, the American Congress, the very conservative religious bloc in the Republican Party, and of course, Israelis and Jews and so on. And to get a reaction, and that actually to mask about what was going on and so on. And there are two things that we'll get sometime in the future, and we've talked in the past about the two things that the Iranians were very concerned about over the last 20 years they've had to deal with. First, they start off, let's look at the first problem, because I like to start talking about Iran. I think it was a basic formulative and reactive, and now they are again in a formulative policy, and we are trying to figure out how to meet that challenge. So the Iranians,
that puts us one down.
We have to get back in the front. So, and now that struggle takes place because everybody, as you noticed from what we discussed the last time, the agreement with Iran, everybody is now figuring out who is violating the agreement. But of course, the agreement isn't even in place yet. Only the preliminary document of intent, and we all know what, being a lawyer, I'm sure you know what a letter of intent means. Very
Not
little
much.
until you go to a law, until you come to court 3 years later, 5 years later. It doesn't
Usually they're non-binding.
Right. And so yes, we have the court of public opinion binding the agreement between the United States and the Iranians, and it also has the force of timeliness, of history. It's been going on for over a year and a half, as Netanyahu found out to his chagrin. It was like, what? They didn't call me? They didn't invite me? No, you didn't talk nicely. You don't get invited. You don't know how to behave at a party. You're not going to get invited to all the parties, only those where you have to contribute something. So I think that the whole thing with Iran and the U.S., everybody's now jockeying for position after the public announcement of the agreement. And if you notice, everybody is reinterpreting what was really meant. This is not really important, because the real import of the whole process is going to happen in the checking of who is committed, who has committed, and how are they interpreting the commitment on the ground, which is monitored by the United Nations Atomic Energy Commission. I forgot the formal name. So this is the game, and that's going to take now several weeks or months until the end of the 6 months period almost. And what was promised to the Iranians, of course, is that there will be a slight easing of sanctions. Now, this is a very misleading statement also, this easing of sanctions. What does that really mean? We know that the Chinese have violated the sanctions to some degree. We know the Turks have violated the sanctions to some degree. We know that Germans have violated it. We know that some people in the U.S. have violated this. So again, interpretation is a very important component of any one of these agreements. Okay, so that'll be
different
now.
people interpret it different
Right.
ways.
So it's like being a little pregnant. In international politics, you can have slight pregnancy. It's not necessary to complete to term. And even if you don't have a removal of the pregnancy, you can still continue in a process that may continue for beyond 9 months, sometimes for years. So this we have to remember over here, this particular interpretation phase. And now, what does everybody want to get out of it? So the Iranians obviously want to be relieved of this economic pressure that the sanctions have put on.
That's their primary, requirement.
Yeah, but you see, people, when people read this analysis, especially in the West, that the Iranians, some sanctions are going to be lifted, and the interpretation from the reciprocal side, from the negotiating side, which in this case is the 5 powers in the United States, actually the United States, if we look at the beginning of the process, if they like to say that Iran came crawling because of the sanctions. This is not exactly true, because if you know how the plutocracy and the autocracy in these countries run, or in this case a theocracy, plus having its own military power, because Iran has the Revolutionary Guards, which is like a little more than the Vatican Swiss Guard. They are the de facto army, even though they're supposed to be the protectors of the faith.
Right.
So
The inner army.
But they are there. It's imagine that Delta Force together with the Navy SEAL teams are running the country now. You know, they just have a little office next to the president in the White House, and they explain to the president what's going his schedule tomorrow. So, except that we know also Ayatollah Khamenei, who is the dear religious leader in Iran, controls pretty much events. But again, control is a very misleading word in the Iranian context. This is a very big country, not only in numbers of people, also in terms of size, in terms of complex functions. Just because they may wear a hijab or face covering, you know, or may appear modest in public places, or circumspect about what they may say, this does not mean that they are backwards. Because people all the time think that just because a Muslim is defined in the West as a Muslim culture, it's necessarily backward. This is not true. And I think that Iran and Turkey are prime examples of cultures that are certainly not backwards. When you see the industrial might of Turkey, when you see a country that's creating a nuclear weapon, these are not countries, and when they have scientists and academicians, those who have fled or immigrated to the United States, very reputable. In fact, it's one of the few Muslim countries that has actually academic distinction, actually publishes papers, actually does research, and so on. So I think getting that gestalt, getting that mindset about who the adversary is very important. And understanding the power, as I mentioned, the power brokers in Iran are the Revolutionary Guards, the theological establishment, and then I would say number 3, the people. The country is afraid of the people for several reasons. One, you have a fairly big educated class for what we would think of as a third world country. And that's thanks to having their parents and grandparents having learned machinations of politics when the CIA funded the Shah of Iran and set him up in power, and when Israeli and American companies pretty much ran things in Tehran in terms of construction, development, university, research institutions were built
back
primarily
into the 60s and the 70s.
even earlier. So it was built really by the West. and by us, and I think it was smart to try to get a modern, so to speak, theocracy if it could, because Iran could have simply been very much like Turkey in the sense, like after Ataturk, a civil society. So that gives a little bit picture of Iran. But the players in America we'll get to in a second. I think let's look at Israel, okay? Because Israel has done something which many people in Israel think is not good policy. To go out, what Netanyahu has done before the re-election of President Obama, currently is doing to try to jeopardize or to try to influence American politics.
In the open.
In the open, right. And no one says you cannot have talks, but Israel and America are allies since the birth of Israel, and probably responsible for, in a large extent, for the ability of Israel to survive through difficult periods, primarily with weaponry, which, although if you know your history, you know that America did not give Israel weapons to achieve its independence. It was actually the communist governments that gave Israel its weapons, Czechoslovakia, Russia, to fight. Why were they interested? Just as an aside, they were interested because they had already established the front lines of the Cold War after World War II, and obviously Britain and France were taking care of the Middle East. So if the Soviet Union was able to come as a countervailing force, it thought Israel, being a socialist country at the time, was a natural ally, because also it had many Slavic people and Russian immigrants and so on. And the founders of Israel were Russian Jews primarily,
it makes
and
sense.
German intellectuals. So they thought, here's the Socialist International. In fact, as a young kid, I was in the youth movement, similar to what the communists had with the Red Pioneers. And I was a member of Israel Zionist movement, which were mostly left-leaning. You'd call them socialists. We didn't think it was a dirty word because most of the country was organized on a socialist basis.
The whole notion of a kibbutz is a socialist utopia.
Communist, actually. Kibbutz is a true communist society. Unfortunately, we're now seeing the final breakup of the kibbutz system because you cannot survive in an electronic environment. See, everybody else have the toys and the gadgets and the iPhone and the iPad and the
They got to
computer.
work hard in agriculture and have none
Well,
of
they
that.
also have industry in the kibbutzim too, but people start thinking. In fact, I wrote my master's thesis on inequality in a kibbutz society many years ago.
Interesting, yeah.
And I said that it starts very, very simple in Israel. The kibbutz societies failed because what they realized after they all worked in the fields and they all ate together and slept together at the early years in the 20s, 30s, and 40s of the last century, then they said, well, after the establishment of the state, someone has to also provide some leadership within these communal societies that were perhaps 200 families. The big ones were like 1,300 families. But, I mean, they're not cities. I mean, they were what you'd describe in large villages. But someone has to run things. Like you need money. First of all, a kibbutz society, which was totally egalitarian, there was no money. Everybody, you cooked, you went to a central dining home for your meals. Your children grew up in the children's house. They'd come to visit you in the afternoon after you got back from work. And so you didn't have to take care of your children's needs.
It sounds beautiful, Rafi.
It sounded great. So here's where the problem come in. So when they started getting organized and they saw that they made product like the fruits and vegetables. So the kibbutz were agricultural to begin with. Then they're milking cows, and they're picking fruits from the trees, and they're planting. Everything is hunky-dory, just like the communes, And then they said, well, now we've got enough to eat. We take care of our own needs. This woman who is a kibbutz member, she'll take care of the children because she knows something, she's had 6, so she knows something about raising children. They start specializing a little bit. Then they said, but you know what? We have excess tomatoes and we have excess watermelons and we have excess milk and we make cheese. And what are we going to do with it? We need money to buy a tractor. So they start into putting together organizations of various communal farms. And so now you've got a network of these societies. Never did that group reach more than 3% of Israel's population.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh,
but because they were so committed on ideology, they formed the essence, the core of all the top positions in politics and in military.
Because they were the ideal.
They were the idealists, so they didn't care about risking their life for the country.
Political capital.
Yeah, for the people, for my family,
Yeah.
just like I did. My parents also were in a kibbutz originally, and so we grew up. That's the way we grew up. You know, we had a blue shirt with a red string or white string for our political affiliations and so on.
Oh, I love it. We have to have another show about this.
Well, right, but I want
Wait. We're going to take a break.
Okay.
Okay, this is Rafi Boritzer, and he's a lecturer in public administration at West Oahu campus. We're talking about west of Asia here. We're talking about Israeli politics in 2014 and much more. We'll be right back after this break.
Aloha, I'm Nicole Horry for Think Tech. For nearly half a century, the Hawaii Foreign Trade Zone No. 9 has brought the benefits of the Foreign Trade Zone program to Hawaii businesses and entrepreneurs. DBET, the Department of Business, Economic Development, and Tourism, operates Hawaii's Foreign Trade Zone program to encourage international business and economic development. The Foreign Trade Zone's mission is to increase the amount of international trading activity in Hawaii, thereby providing employment opportunities for the residents of our island state. For more information, see ftz9.org. I'm Nicole Horry. Mahalo.
It's Monday. This is Think Tech Talks. We're here with Rafi Boritzer in west of Asia. He's a lecturer in public administration in West Oahu campus. We're talking today about Israeli politics in 2014 and much more.
So the reason I go into a little bit of the background, because to understand Israeli politics, you have to understand the Israeli political system. If you learned it in school, if you learn Middle East studies in school, it's very simple in America. I minored in political studies of the Middle East, and one of the things you learn is, oh, this is a Sunni monarchy, this is a Shiite monarchy, this is a sultanate, this is so on, based over from the Ottoman Empire, left over by the British and the French after World War I, Treaty of Versailles. Everything is very simple. When you come to Israel, it's not so simple. The political parties, because we were under British mandate from 1921 till 1948, we had the British system of the Knesset, or the parliamentary system, 120 seats, 120 members of parliament. Simple. The rules, same rules, just like in England, you know, voting. It's not like Korea where we hit people in the face or something. Like, I don't want to disparage the Korean, but their politics sometimes get a little wilder. But the same system, the same system. The problem was that to be elected, you could not be an individual running for a seat in the parliament or the Knesset. You had to run with a political party. And then according to the number of votes that the political parties got, they would get the number of seats in parliament. A total of always 120.
So you couldn't just put your own name up and run for office.
No, you had to go to a party.
You had the blessing of the party.
Right. Now, that normally when you have Republicans and Democrats, you can see the stalemate, you know, you could have a nice stalemate and nothing moves. When you get into a country that's set up by immigrants, with everybody speaking a different language and speaking in three major religions and the former colonial history, then you get a real chaotic pot. Then it's like leftover night on Sunday night at someone's house, you know, Thanksgiving dinner leftovers. And what you get is we have 23 political parties. So what does that mean when you have 23 political parties? Everybody has their own ideology, their own point of view, their own agenda. And now to govern, you need 61 votes. So, but slightly better than the American system, this is not left over to strong things. You must vote with your party.
You mean the individual representatives must
vote with their party, even though some of the parties only have 3 members.
It's lockstep.
It's lockstep. So the coalitions are made up of parties, not individuals. You cannot take someone unless the head of your political faction says that he's giving freedom to his people to vote their conscience, because it may be something that has to do with religion or philosophy or personal beliefs. Or
That's the exception.
That's the exception.
61 out of how many?
120.
Okay,
That's a majority.
So more than half,
majority.
yeah,
That's
okay.
the only rule.
Yeah, yeah.
So now what happens is, prior to the elections, some of the parties try to make agreements. In case I win, I will be with you because we share some of the same belief about military, or we share some of the same belief about public housing, or we share the same belief about civil rights.
Negotiating a coalition.
Right. So now I'll give you an example of some of the parties that exist. We have 8 Arab political parties. Many of them, almost all of them, have 1 or 2 seats.
It's interesting, you know, because people, if you ask the guy on the street, you would say the Arabs, you know, his reading of the newspapers, such as they are, is the Arabs are not involved in Israeli government.
No.
The Israelis shun the Arabs, and they're not involved. They have no position, no power.
Now, let me ask you something. What do you think
What
what is the population of the Arab population of Israel, do you think? Percentage.
Wow, maybe 20%, 30%?
Exactly.
20%.
Right? 20% is exactly it. Now, let me ask you, of those 20%, what religion do you think they are?
I don't know.
They're split between Christians and Muslims.
Okay.
So there's Christian Arabs and Muslim Arabs. Do you think they have the same interests?
No.
No. So let's
The
look
religion will govern.
Right, so let's look now at the Arabs who are not Christian. What is their belief system, do you think?
Are they in favor of the state of Israel?
Well, they're Israeli citizens. I don't question if they're in favor
Okay,
or not.
assume they'll belong
They
to
call
the
it the
state.
Nakba. Nakba is a word for the defeat, for the tragedy of the Arab people. So every year they celebrate Nakba, the tragedy that befell them in 48 when Israel became a state. But they still, vote, and they have members in parliament. So the situation with them is they're not a unitary bloc, and they never vote together. And they never join any of the Israeli liberal parties or pro-peace parties in voting together.
Do they go into the coalitions?
No,
Ah, interesting.
because most of the Jewish coalitions either don't want them or the Arab coalitions don't want to join them. So usually
they never
usually-
get into a position of power.
they never get position of power. They sometimes can influence a swing vote. But that is very rarely because they don't want to appear to favor one side or another and give strength to someone who may vote
they don't
against it.
like.
Right, exactly. So this is already the beginning of the
Complicated.
situation. And where we are today, we often hear in Israel about is Israel negotiating with the Palestinians about the peace, because we conquered in 67 big chunks of Arab territories from Jordan, Egypt, and Syria. And we conquered them after they attacked us on June 6, 1967.
I remember where I was when that happened, actually.
Without provocation, they massed on the border, and it took Israel 6 days to defeat the
6-day war.
6-day war. 3 Arab armies. Not only that, we tripled the size of Israel by the territory we took back. Later on, in 1979, President Carter brokered a peace agreement for which he and Sadat, and I think it was Menachem Begin, who was Prime Minister of Israel, all got Nobel Prizes for peace. I think Yasser Arafat, too.
What peace was that? The peace after the 6-day war?
No, Yasser Arafat didn't get it that time. No, he got it together with Yitzhak Rabin.
Okay.
Right. So they got the Nobel Peace Prize for peace with Egypt. In 1979, Israel signed its first peace agreement with an Arab country, and that was with Egypt. And so in return for the Sinai War, where I served in the military most of my time, and they received, we got a peace agreement with Egypt. It wasn't a warm peace like, you go to Canada, you go to Mexico. We went to visit them. They didn't come very often to visit us. So it was a little different. But it was okay. It's still holding. And the recent events in the Middle East, the General al-Sisi taking over and the Muslim Brotherhood taking over, all those events were in a position really to affect the welfare and peace and safety and security of Israel. So right now, in terms of a self-interest, and perhaps also good for the Egyptian people on a temporary basis, the military government, that was the same type of government under Mubarak, President Mubarak, is back in power, and the peace is pretty well kept. In fact, there is a good coordination on security events, because again, it's never easy in the Middle East. And so when you talk about Egypt, you have to talk about the Gaza Strip. And we talked on the first time I came on your show, the Gaza Strip was at war. And Israel was attacking the Gaza Strip because they had lobbed so many hundreds of rockets at our civilian population center. So that all changed. Now, because of the change in government in Egypt, which is no longer supported by the Brotherhood, which was allied with the leadership of the Gaza Strip, they are in bad shape because the Egyptian government closed all the smuggling tunnels that were used to smuggle weapons and
Into
so
Gaza,
on.
yeah.
And so
this is better for Israel.
this is better for Israel. So so if you're a civil rights person, or if you're a person who believes that democracy is the ultimate goal of all governments, or social justice, or political justice, well, this is not perhaps such a wonderful event for the Egyptian people to have a military government. But I think in terms of applied politics, you have to understand that Egypt is a country where it produces quite a number of educated people, but its economy being so plundered over so many years by the autocracy, hasn't been able to support or develop
I mean, a few
economic.
people taking all the money.
Right.
So, so is the peace in good shape now with all
Yeah, the peace is good.
instability?
Well, I
in
think in
Egypt?
terms of the relationship between General Al-Sisi, who's the vice president of the country and also the head of the military, is very good. And there's a lot of cooperation to prevent all kinds of terrorism acts coming from the Sinai. Now, again, we talk about the Sinai. I'm very familiar with the Sinai, having served there. It's made up, there are a lot of Bedouins there.
But the
Bedouins,
Sinai borders on Egypt.
but it also borders on Israel.
Right. Well, it's common border.
Right. We no
It's a
longer,
long
that's
common
our
border.
Egypt border now. It used to be the Egypt border was the Suez Canal.
Yeah.
And now, since we gave the territory back in '79, now it's our border that there's right. But it has that whole group of people in the Sinai who were never Egyptian; they were Bedouins.
Yeah.
And this is another complication in the whole Middle East. When we talk about the Middle East and Iran, you're talking about groups of people with different loyalties, different agendas, and different desires and objectives. And it's very simple to always break them down into Sunnis and Shiites. But that's a very coarse breakup. It doesn't really explain what has happened, what is happening, and what will happen. Because not everybody always fights or supports their particular sect. They may have political agenda, depends upon what their socio-demographic level they're at. So this has to be kept in mind. Now the Bedouins are nomadic. They've always made their living from smuggling. So when they were part of Egypt before the Six
they
Day
still
War,
do.
and they still do.
Okay.
But there's less to smuggle. I mean, in the old days there were a lot of tariffs and there were a lot of customs. The world has become a little more open in terms of goods. There's much more public smuggling. You don't need to go through the desert. I'll just give you a very illustrative idea of how the smuggling went up in the Sinai. The Bedouins are very intuitive. They've been around for 3,000, 4,000 years living in the desert. They don't read or write, usually those who are nomadic still in the desert. They ride camels. I had happened to be in the camel patrol myself. My job was to go from different Bedouin tribes and pacify them and give them services, health, medical, governmental, justice, police, and so on my camel in our brigade. And also collect
you rode a
intelligence.
camel?
Yes.
All right.
And then collect intelligence also because we were part of the military occupation at the time. So now one of the things they do, they were intuitive and they always would tell me, Commander, that there will be peace between the Egyptians and the Israelis. This was back in the early 70s, they said, and we're waiting for that. And I knew what they meant. They had bought or stolen Mercedes in Israel, buried them in the desert.
Under the sand.
Under the
Mercedes.
sand.
Under the
Mercedes.
sand.
Dozens of Mercedes. Even more. I only knew about dozens. And what they did, they covered brand new Mercedes. They would cover them in sheeting, plastic sheeting, spray like Vaseline, like a coating that you buy a new car with,
Yeah.
and buried it. Why did they do that?
For the day of redemption, whatever that was, what was coming? What did they?
Well, what was
because
it?
ultimately they could get it across the border, and
Right. How do you get it across the border? You wait for a peace agreement between Egypt and Israel.
then you drive it across the border.
And then you're in
And you
your
have
own country. There's no
tariff.
border.
Okay.
Suddenly, the car is the car without moving moved.
That was very optimistic of them, don't you think?
And then it happened. And it happened because the Egyptian made the peace. They now control the border to Israel. In the desert, in the Sinai desert, are all these cars that are now tax-free.
So now
Really?
you can take the sheet off it, get it up on the ground, and drive it
later,
around.
why do I mention this? Because the Bedouins still, they are a group of people that everybody kind of forgot. Israel kind of forgot them, and just made sure that they weren't hostile. The Egyptians forgot them, but as things that kind of dried up in tourism in the Sinai, because Israelis don't go there anymore because they say it's a little dangerous. It's not our soldiers or who are providing security, and we don't trust because maybe some of the military policemen can be bought off or whatever. So they go less and less. There were a few terrorist attacks, and the Israelis said, and the government said, "Look, going to Sinai at your own risk," And so people
So
got
it used to be a kind of a vacation
Oh,
area?
yeah, along the whole Red Sea, along the Gulf of Aqaba, hotels, there's Hiltons and everything else, but it got kind of dangerous. The Danish tourists, the Scandinavians fly in the winter directly to Sharm el-Sheikh, to Aqaba.
And the weather was good.
and the weather is excellent all year long. It's like being in Florida, you know.
Yeah, Waikiki.
So I think so. This is so that is it. So the Bedouins are impoverished. They're looking for sources of income. They start tying into some of the terror groups out of the Gaza Strips because they connect to the Gaza Strip.
Okay, so when we come back, we're going to find out about how that worked, tying into terror. This is Rafi Boritzer. He's an Israeli, then and now, an electorate in public administration at West Oahu campus, president of Maritime Protectors company here. And we're talking about West of Asia, Israeli politics in 2014, and much more. We'll be right back. Aloha, I'm Jay Fidell of ThinkTech. ThinkTech is a 501c3 Hawaii nonprofit corporation. We began ThinkTech in the year 2000. At ThinkTech, we work to raise public awareness about tech, energy diversification, and globalism in Hawaii. We do 20 live stream talk shows every business day, and we do a weekly TV show on OC16. We pay the bills with donations from our supporters. Won't you help us by making a donation? All you need to do is go to our website, thinktechhawaii.com, and click there on the donate button. We hope that you like what we do and that you will support us and help us continue to do it. Thanks so much for watching and for helping. I'm Jay Fidell of ThinkTech. Mahalo.
It functions now and why it
Okay,
doesn't function.
we're back. We're live. We're ThinkTech in West of Asia. We're talking about Israeli politics in 2014 and beyond. What an interesting discussion from Rafi Boritzer, lecturer in public administration in West Oahu campus, and who is deeply, deeply knowledgeable about this. So we're talking about the Bedouins.
We're talking about the
and
Bedouins. And
terrorists.
why are they important? Because they have the opportunity to create havoc on the borders of Israel in several ways. And Israel, I think if you don't understand the internal mechanism, the social pressures, the political pressures that either create or have an impact on policy, you don't understand Israeli reaction and behavior towards Iran, towards the U.S., and towards its neighbors. And I think it's critical to understand that if you're going to understand whatever events happen, why they don't just happen in a vacuum. So here you've got now the Bedouins. They have little income because of the dangerous situation in the Sinai. So what they try to find employment, so they start being employed by terror groups because they have freedom of movement. They're on camels or old pickup truck, and they start putting bombs on the border or crossing the Israeli border, planting roadside bombs, IUDs, and stuff like that. Because now that the Egyptian army closed Gaza, sealed it up, so you cannot get into Egypt before through tunnels or anything else. The only way Gazans, this is the most dense place in the world. There are over 1 million Gaza people living in a place the size of probably Lanai.
Okay, and we're talking now, right?
Now.
It's not historic, this is right now.
Now,
Okay,
right.
Okay.
So they had tunnels to smuggle everything. The Bedouins were the smugglers for the Gaza government, arms, cement, everything. Israel controls a blockade at sea and through entry points. So the Gaza government, which is controlled by Hamas, which is a Shiite-oriented, I wouldn't even say Shiite, I'd say Syria supported, the Muslim Brotherhood supported, and they've lost all their support now. So they are dependent on Israel's goodwill or the pressure from Western European countries like Holland, Scandinavia, and so on, to ask Israel to let them have critical supplies. Israel said it will only give to aid agencies supplies to make sure they're not used for building weaponry or offensive system. So this is a pressure cooker because you've got all these people in a very small place, and we don't know what is going to happen there. But it would, for instance, there's a 6-mile blockade of their seacoast, so the fishermen complain that the good fish are about 12 miles out. Israel says it's for our safety that we don't want a lot of fishing boats because many times they carry terrorists. And so this is the ongoing complexity. And they also, Hamas used to be part of the West Bank, one occupied territory ruled by the Palestinians, but they broke up because of political allegiance. The West Bank, controlled by Prime Minister President Abbas, who's president of the Palestinian territory on the West Bank, trying to negotiate through carry a peace agreement with Israel, another problem. So these problems are they seem isolated, they're connected, but they're also different problems. It's not one Arab, it's not one Israeli, it's all kinds of issues. The alliances.
Can you ever get to the bottom of it? Middle Eastern politics are very complex. They've been complex forever.
Right.
Can you ever really get to the bottom? I mean, you have a great level of knowledge, but are you satisfied that you know, who does know, really all that's going on?
I think not many, but people know. People know what's going on. The thinking people know what's going on, the people who are interested, the people in the political echelons and so on. The question is even more complex. What can you do about it?
Sure.
And what you can do about it is always come down to pressure. Where can we put pressure? So the Israeli government puts pressure on their Hamas by blocking up if they act like nice boys and girls and they don't place both side bombs, we let more supplies go in and so on. Because the Gaza Strip used to be Israel's workforce. They crossed every morning across the border and built houses and built roads.
Labor.
And that was an income for the Gaza Strip. They decided to become, and the people, you see, here's the major disconnect in America and the West. It's thought that, why, people always say to me, why don't the people in Gaza get rid of this Hamas?
Good question.
Right. So when you understand that in the third world, and the Arab world is really a third world, probably even more so in some respects than poor European countries and so on, you have to understand that people don't just rise. It's not like when they go to vote, their block captain who tells them how they're going to vote, and this is not a surprise. There are no surprises in the Arab world in politics. This is the essence of it. So don't expect that the ballot box will give you some direction or force some change. Change comes at the point of a gun.
And that's the way it is. That's the reality.
That's a reality.
Democracy is kind of a veneer at best.
Right. Because the loyalty comes from the tribe, from the clan, from the religious. When I asked you before if you knew what Israeli Arabs are made of, that wasn't an idle question. It was that they're made of various groups. One of the groups are the Druze. The Druze are also split off from the 19th century from Islam, from mainstream Islam, and they are a secretive break-off. They're a break-off that you cannot join. You cannot intermarry. So they constantly inbreed in terms of political philosophy, in terms of biology, in terms of everything else. And they're very loyal. They're loyal to the country they live in. So the Druze actually serve in the Israeli military. Okay? They're conscripted. It's not voluntary, just like any other Israeli Jew.
But they serve voluntarily after being conscripted, no?
Well, no. I mean, they understand. That's for them also employment. They're the only ones who actually reach the level of general in the Israeli military. So it's really a very unique situation. Christian soldiers serve in high position, Christian Arabs. So unless you have a group that is opposed to the state, many people say, why don't you conscript also all the Israeli Arabs like the Jews? But that could create a very big havoc.
Yeah.
So some of the ideas is perhaps make everybody do national service.
Of some kind.
Of some
Not
kind.
necessarily
Right,
military,
right.
something else.
And so
That's not happening now.
no. And that's okay.
It's
And why
happening in
isn't
the
it
US as far as I'm
happening? Why isn't it happening? So it's not happening because we have different political groups. This is what I want to talk about now. When Netanyahu makes a statement, when he starts needling Obama, when he says things to try to disrupt the political equation, he couldn't care less about the political equation in America. But he has support groups in America. And one of the support groups is the evangelical Christians.
Yeah. Isn't it interesting how that works?
Right. They believe, and many people don't understand about evangelical Christians. I mean, the purpose of evangelical Christians, their relationship to Israel
And the Holy Land.
and the Holy Land is to make sure that all the Jews survive until they can be converted to Christ. That's a basic paradigm. So it's we'll give you money, we'll give you political support, and at the end, when the days, because I'm not good at Christian doctrine, comes, we'll accept you into heaven. Or your souls will be admitted into heaven. And I mean, they have the right to Christian philosophy, but unfortunately, when it comes into Israeli politics, it starts having, different ramifications.
Yeah.
And So when Netanyahu doesn't get his way with the politics in the White House, whether it's Barack Obama, it's on board, Lyndon Johnson, Richard Nixon, it didn't make a difference. He goes the back channel, treading on the Christian philosophy and ideology.
Because it's a political force.
Right. So he goes against Obama. Obviously, he didn't play well because not enough of his supporters in the Christian community were able to swing the vote from Romney to Obama. And it was a kind of silly thing because you just jeopardize, you're playing at the lowest possible level. So now, why would he do this? Why would he do this? He does this because he needs to survive as a political leader. This is his third time as prime minister. And each time people get tired of it.
These are not consecutive times either.
No.
Comes and goes.
He comes and goes. So every time, so he needs to stay. So he needs to do this with different coalition. We used to have a very strong left socialist coalition that is very pro-peace and giving back the territories. This is the eternal question in Israel. Give back the occupied territories. In 1967, many friends of mine who were sociologists, academicians in Israel said, this occupation, this suddenly bounty of Israel becoming 3 times its size, and we've given back Sinai, so it's a little less, will come to haunt us. We will pay a political price, and we have paid a political price. Israeli society has become almost a mirror of American society, where our whole commitment in terms of to the poor, to people who have no food, to people who are homeless, has disappeared. That's why we had riots and demonstrations 2 years ago, exactly because.
Yeah. What, before there was greater care and concern for them, now less.
Because of the political alliances. Who gets elected, what party? And we have always something that you have only in the Muslim world, and that's called religious parties, except in Italy. Sometimes you have a religious party with Berlusconi and so. But in Israel, we have religious parties who will always a swing vote. So what do they want? They are basically into money and education and not serving in the army and not working.
Well, this isn't very productive.
No,
nor is
it's
it a
very
good sign
unusual.
for the country.
One of the symbols of Orthodox Jewish presence in America is especially in New York City. When you see Jews with black beards, where do you see them often? Around the Diamond District. Because many of them get into businesses that are 3rd or 4th generation. Diamonds, they trade in the Brussels or the Antwerp.
It's a global business.
It's a global business of diamonds, and the Orthodox Jews have controlled it for a long time, especially at the trading centers, Israel, South Africa, and Belgium, and New York City. And so, but they're working. These are Orthodox Jews who are religious, and God bless them, I don't care. But they work. In Israel, there's a philosophy that if you're going to study the Bible, you shouldn't work. This is something that you do.
How can you have an economy that way?
Right. Well, we're supposed to, the non-religious group part of Israel, which is the majority, is supposed to support them. How do we support them? The religious parties always give them stipends, prevented them from going into the military.
From the government.
From the government. So we are all paying for them to be religious and study because they said they are in the army of the Torah. They are saving our souls. That's their mission. And so I have to pay for it.
Sounds like a good deal. So how many, what's the tipping point here? I mean, after a while, that could get
These
really...
are hundreds of thousands, and now they passed a law about 2 years ago that they must serve in the army. There's no more because the political balance has changed.
How do they react to that?
They don't like it at all. They are not in the government. They were always in a coalition because each side needed them for international events, for other social things. Now they're out, so they don't get their cash allowance. So suddenly they have no power to influence. They say, oh, we're not going to vote for a peace agreement. Well, we don't need you.
So you're painting a picture, a very complex political landscape in Israel.
That's why it's very difficult on CNN in 1 minute or less to explain what the impact and what is prodding Netanyahu to make outrageous statements when the U.S. and Iran, after 34 years of not talking, suddenly are talking.
Can you say that he's rational about this? Could he be wrong in the way he interprets these political vectors?
Netanyahu is never wrong about wanting to stay in power.
Okay, fair enough.
And so everything is motivated because, again, you heard about the Portnoy's complaint
Sure.
The story about a Jewish boy who all the time is totally screwed up because of his mother. Right. Well, they.
Think Tech goes wide on this kind of thing. We cover one side to the other.
And Netanyahu has Portnoy's father's complaint. And that was his father was a very big academician on Jewish history and so on at the university in Israel. And he always made his children feel inferior. So one actually became very famous. He led the Israel Special Force Unit into Uganda and rescued the hostages when the plane was hijacked.
That was a major episode.
Right, and that was he was killed he was the only person killed in the operation, and it was Netanyahu's brother. Netanyahu later became also head of Special Forces Unit. So it's very called Sayeret Matkal, means the headquarters unit. This is like SEAL Team 6 or Delta Force, and it's so. And not only that, most of our politicians have come through this particular channel.
It makes them into different people that are different than most other people.
Right. Well, sometimes they think that you don't need politics. You can circumvent it, but the system is very well entrenched that it doesn't let you act on your own.
So is he in good odor now?
Is he in good one?
Odor.
In what sense?
Netanyahu. I mean, he's in power.
He's in power, right? But
But
he is.
do people like him?
No, but they feel somehow maybe there's no better alternative since our president is in prison. Our past president has been put in prison for sexual, I guess, something common also in American politics and Canadian.
You said it was a mirror, right?
It was a mirror. So that, and we've had several prime ministers who've been indicted. In fact, right now, what is happening right now is our ex-prime minister who was indicted and under house detention. Just the court dismissed some of the charges against him, and their prosecution is appealing it. They can appeal the prosecution.
Whenever you see, political figures indicted and imprisoned, you wonder if that itself is political. It usually is political around the world.
No, in fact, we think
these are true
in
criminals?
Israel. Well, I think in Israel it's really the opposite. Not enough of our politicians are in prison. There should be a few more, and we can always come up at least in any dinner conversation. We can come up with at least 4 to 5 names of people who've been lucky.
We have 2 minutes left, so we've got to continue the conversation when you're available, hopefully early next year. But what's your prediction for how this is all going to go?
I think, first of all, I think people who disparage the agreement with Iran and say, especially some hawkish Israelis, I think are way off the mark. So what would have been? Israel should have bombed Iran. And so what would that have bought us? 24 months of rest, but we can get 24 months with any agreement we want. I don't think that when you have an emerging nuclear superpower, you don't want to test it. We've seen with the North Koreans, if it was so dangerous, why didn't America react to the North Koreans? Mm-hmm. Because there are some other interested geopolitics of Chinese and Pacific countries.
Never easy.
And you have to pick up the pieces after you've attacked. We saw it from Afghanistan, Iraq, and on and on. Attacking is easy. Concluding a war is very, very difficult. And even for Israel, even if Israel is a superpower, which it is not, it's a little disingenuous to say, I'm going to stop the Iranians from developing a nuclear weapon. You can't stop almost any country unless you're willing to nuke them. Really,
now that this agreement is, however, I was going to say in place, but in place is not the right term. Now this agreement is incipient anyway. What can Netanyahu do? What will he do?
I think he doesn't have much active role to play. He can ally himself probably with Saudi Arabia and Qatar on a temporary alliance, together with, we have to see what happens in Syria. Strange things are happening. The alliances are forming and reforming as we speak. But, I take some hope from countries like Qatar. I know they're not the perfect country that we'd like to support, but I've been to Oman and I've been to Qatar and Bahrain. And I think the Gulf is changing too, and they may take some leadership position as part of the rearrangements of things in the Gulf. And also the importance of oil is going to be lessening. So all kinds of things are going to be changing.
It strikes me from what you said that things are happening. They're moving faster. More things are in play in the Middle East now than ever before in the world, ever. Because who knows why? Maybe it was Bush's adventure into Iraq it's sort of destabilized, and things are getting reorganized. Am I right?
Yes, I think so too. I think you have to think about the Middle East like a Halloween party.
A Halloween party.
Every year when you go to a Halloween party, to your friends or your children they went in a costume. And every year you try to change the costume. Now is during the Halloween party, people go to the toilet and they come up with a new costume.
New
each
costumes
time.
every minute.
Every minute. So it's
Okay.
tough to tell the players.
Rafi, it's always an adventure with you. Rafi Boritzer, lecturer in public administration, West Oahu campus, and president of Maritime Protectors. Here we are in Think Tech's West of Asia, talking about Israeli politics in 2014, and that's only chapter 1. There's a long way to go. We'll be back with more soon. Thank you, Rafi.